As Dan mentioned too, we're just going to focus on composting at home, and by that, backyard composting at home. So what is compost? So the interesting thing is composting and compost are used almost interchangeably at this point, but they're totally different things. So composting, the verb, is the process that works up to speed the natural environment to create the finished product of compost. You can read the official definition on the slide here. But by combining carbon and nitrogen materials, we're really just setting the stage for the microorganisms to come in and eat those materials, and they create temperatures, and then it turns into compost, which is amazing. So you're just really setting the stage for these microorganisms to thrive, creating that environment for them. Compost, the soil amendment, is what you apply back to your gardens at the end of the process. The 5 key components of composting are volume, temperature, air, moisture, and microorganisms. So you need to have enough material to create high temperatures. You need to make sure there's oxygen in your pile. You need to make sure there's water in your pile. And again, all of that will set the stage for the microorganisms to come in and do the work. We like to talk about some fun facts about composting. I think composting has experienced a bit of a renaissance right now. People are very interested in it. It seems like a new idea, but it is actually as old as our planet. It is basically how nature designed to recycle everything. Another fun fact, humans are the only species that create trash. That's a big one. But the cool thing about, there are clay tablets recorded from the Mesopotamian Akkadian Empire dating back to 2334 BC, showing sustainable gardening methods, including composting. So it has been around forever. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson journaled extensively because they were farmers and they were always trying to, create healthier soils, to create better yields. So composting is not a new idea, but perhaps our approach to it is new. Why are we composting? We're composting to save money and resources, both in your own personal life. You can save money on synthetic fertilizers. You can save money on your trash bill in Lower Merion Township. We can all save money by not sending these things to the landfills. We can also extend the life of landfills. So in Lower Merion, we are sending them all the materials to incinerators, but Chester County sends their materials to a landfill. Within 10 years, that landfill will close. 30 to 40% of the material we send to landfills and incinerators is food waste. I think 22% in 2018 plus yard waste gets us to that 40 number. So when you start to think about food waste being the single largest category that we are sending to landfills today, if we could take that out of the waste stream, we are dramatically reducing the amount of waste we are sending to landfills and incinerators. Our trash continues to accelerate, I think 6% year over year. 2018, I think is the most recent data available, we sent 292.2 million tons to landfills and incinerators in the US. So that is a huge number. Again, and that's basically almost 4 years ago. So it's no doubt been climbing since then. So, this is just a really critical part of the overall picture, but by no means the only solution. I'm going to go to the next one. So reduce your impact. So also, when we send organic materials to a landfill environment, so in landfills, they dump the trash in, then they put a layer of plastic down, and then they put dirt on top of it to seal it. And they do this daily or every other day, which makes sense to eliminate odors and pest issues. But what they're also doing is sealing out oxygen. And what happens to organic materials, they go through something called anaerobic digestion and release methane gas, which is a powerful greenhouse gas, roughly 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. This has to be pumped out of landfills as it can spontaneously combust, although that's not a common occurrence. But most people think, well, if my food waste goes to a landfill, it'll still biodegrade. And that's actually not completely true. So that's another reason we want to keep this organic waste out of landfills. And then finally, to improve your soil, the application of compost has shown so many benefits for soil health. And actually, compost and healthy soil in general can help sequester carbon by sucking it out of the atmosphere, because it uses that carbon to help feed the plants. This is just a picture of what your trash is made out of. And this half is technically compostable material. So again, if we could really suck that amount of waste out of the waste stream and then recycle it and turn it into something that can be applied back to soil, to me, that's just absolutely the way we need to go. These are all of the things that compost can do when applied back to the soil. So it's also, there's, the compost is used interchangeably with soil, but they're different. So soil is the layer of the Earth's crust. Dirt is degraded soil, which has no microorganisms or beneficial nutrients in it. So dirt is dead soil, essentially. Compost is a soil amendment, a fertilizer that goes back into the soil and replenishes it from nutrients. I think of it, it's like vitamins for the soil, and actually it acts more like a timed release vitamin in that it slowly feeds the soil over time and allows those nutrients to go into the soil. Commercial versus backyard composting. This is where I see a lot of home composters get tripped up, because especially right now, there's a lot of compostable materials on the market in terms of single-use items. Those are usually only meant for commercial composting environments. Those aren't things you should put in your backyard composting system. In addition, if you know someone who's composting with Mother Compost and they're like, oh yeah, I throw everything in there. I'm throwing my cookies away, my kids' leftover cake. That is not something you want to put in a backyard system. So commercial piles are enormous. At least the piles I'm talking about are the ones at our farm. There's also facilities that use all kinds of different method, aerated static piles. But again, there's a methodology, there's a science behind how they're doing it, and they're doing it the same with every pile. But they have way more volume, they're achieving higher temperatures. They have to maintain a temperature of 141 to 160 over a long period of time to burn off all pathogens. It is rare that a backyard system will achieve those temperatures over an extended period of time. You may see spikes if you're doing a great job, but commercial piles can maintain that temperature over 2 weeks. And then they will cure and screen the product so that it looks very similar to a fertilizer that you buy in the store. What's going to come out of your pile is going to look a little different. So just be mindful when you're, starting your composting experiment in the backyard. Things that are labeled compostable may not be good for your backyard system. Definitely no dairy, no meat, and no compostable products. And we'll get into that a little bit more down the road. There's a lot of different ways to compost. I like to say it's kind of like working out. Like, what are you trying to get out of it? Are you starting today and saying, I want to have finished compost to use in my garden by this summer? Okay, well, you're going to want to do this quicker. So you're going to do, I would recommend doing something called batch processing and having multiple containers set up, strategic planning for your browns and your greens. And you'll need to pay much closer attention to what's going on in your pile, possibly taking temperature readings, etc. If you just really want to reduce your household waste and minimize your impact, I call this the add as you go pile. You're just kind of putting your nitrogen kitchen scraps into the pile, covering them with browns, turning, watering, throwing some browns on it, and going about your day. These piles can, if you have someone who's like, I just put stuff in there and eventually it breaks down, that's what we call the slow as you go pile. You're not that worried about the finished product and the results, but you are managing it so that you don't pest or other issues. So again, just think about what your style is or what you want your compost style to be as you're looking to set up your system in your life. Step one, location. Where are you going to put this in your yard? If you have a closed bin system, you may want to put it a little closer to your house because you do have to walk scraps out there regularly. You don't want it to be in full sun. Again, especially these black bins do attract quite a bit of heat. So partial sun is best. You don't want it next to your house. You want it in your yard somewhere. Near a water source is helpful because you will need to add water during the warmer months. But just start to think about what's a good place for this to go. And again, near a water source, partially shaded. And again, maybe not so far that it's going to deter you from actually taking anything out there, especially as it gets colder. Step two, what kind of bin do you want? So these are closed bin systems. Lower Merion Township doesn't have any restrictions today on what type of bin you need to use within the township. So the black bin that you see here, and again, I believe this is the bin that Lower Merion has for purchase at a very nice discount. It's great because it's very easy. It helps mitigate pest issues. These little doors at the bottom, you slide them up and you can scrape your compost out because it will all settle to the bottom of the system. You do need to pay pretty close attention to the watering. That could be as simple as leaving the lid off if you know it's going to rain, but it is not going to get the benefits of just natural rainfall. Tumblers. Now, I have an interesting relationship with tumblers, and I hear more complaints about them than people actually being excited about them. The one you see here, when it's full of material, is very heavy. It's actually somewhat difficult to turn. So the good thing is they are great for aeration and they are very good for mitigating pest issues. Tumblers tend to need a break. If you keep adding fresh materials into the tumbler, what most people will say is like, I'm never getting compost out of it. It's because there's always new materials coming in. So if you put a cake in the oven to bake it, you don't keep adding ingredients all the time. You give it some space to turn into the compost, which is why compost tumblers, call them tumbler twins. People end up getting two of them, which can take up a sizable portion of your yard and may not be the aesthetic you're going for. But if it is, you have my full support. But that can be the best practice for having one bin where you're not adding materials and you're just aerating and watering, and having another one where you are adding materials and then rotating. Open bin systems. So a pallet bin is a really economical way to build. They can be huge. We would also recommend putting, I apologize, I didn't say this in the last one, but under those black bins, recommend putting a layer of rodent resistant steel mesh underneath the black bins, just to be doubly sure that no one's going to try to make your compost system your home. In these open bin systems, there's no point, obviously, because they can get through these very easily. But if you have plenty of space and you're kind of a DIY person, the pallet bins are beautiful. The chicken wire is very, very easy. Even I can construct it. I'm not super handy. The other benefit of building a larger wood structure is that you can do a 3-bin system. So similar to what I was describing with the tumblers, you can have a bin where you're adding fresh material, a bin where everything is, processing and going through the active composting phase, and then have a bin for finished material, and then just, move things around, which can make, the workflow feel very synergetic. Step 3, you start with a layer of finished compost or soil on the bottom. You're also going to want to stockpile brown materials. We're about to go into the season where leaves are going to be no longer as prevalent. Hanging, instead of putting all of them out for yard waste pickup, hanging onto a bag or two can be really beneficial, as leaves are excellent brown materials. Shredded newspaper and brown bags will also work. Watering will be crucial to your pile's effectiveness. especially during summer months where we're not getting as much rainfall. And if it's a closed bin system, you will need to keep a close eye on how much water your bin's been getting. It should always kind of look wet, not soaked, but wet. As the materials look dry and crunchy, its decomp has probably slowed down or stopped. Beyond that, tools we recommend, a pitchfork, a garden hose, a watering can. If you're interested, again, if you're like, I want finished materials in 2 months, and you're really going to take this on from a scientific perspective, a compost aerator is actually, this is a good tool for everybody because it can save your back. You put it in the pile, you spin it around, pull it out, and it puts in air holes without you having to shovel the entire pile up. So if you have back issues or you just don't feel like doing that, compost aerator, they're not expensive, and they're very easy to use tools. A compost thermometer can help put a probe into the center, the core of your pile, and take temperature readings, which will let you know how you're doing and how the materials are reacting together. Step 4, high level, what should go in to your pile? Green materials, so fruits, vegetables, lawn and flower clippings, live lawn and flower clippings, coffee grounds, and tea bags. That is it for a backyard system. Don't put in meat, dairy, anything that's been cooked, especially in butter or oils, because the high fat content, it's unlikely that you're going to be achieving high temperatures, especially if you're just getting started. And then on the brown material side, these are things that are commonly found at home: leaves, shredded paper, newspaper, shredded cardboard and egg cartons, sawdust, eggshells. You may want to grind them up if seeing the little shells in your compost is going to annoy you, because they can take quite a while to fully break down. Corn stalks, and we'll go into corn stalks, branches, and straw, and conifer needles once they've browned are great. Again, if they're still green, they would be in the green materials. So I realize when we're talking about green materials, we're talking about the nitrogen-rich materials. And those are the materials that tend to come out of our kitchens. So, again, nitrogen is green, carbon is brown. So we'll talk now about how we're adding and combining these materials. So you want to break up large materials, as we spoke, I had on there corn stalks, yes, but you have to break it up very, very small. Even in this photo, like a broccoli stalk in a backyard pile needs to be cut up. The smaller you break up the materials, the more surface area you're creating for microorganisms. So instead of one stalk that's a cylinder that only has a certain, 4 sides, if you chop it up, you've now created all of these surfaces for microorganisms, which makes them happy, which makes them eat more, which makes the temperatures rise, which makes everything start moving faster. But it takes them a long time to break down a big, thick tree branch. So you want to be cognizant when you're adding materials to your pile to break things down as small as you can. For the carbon nitrogen ratio, most people will say 2 to 3 parts brown to 1 part green. For a backyard composter who's just getting started, I would say 3 parts brown to 1 part green. That is, the more carbon, having more carbon in the system is less likely to cause you issues than having too much nitrogen. It says here, if you're batch processing, you can go closer to 1-to-1, and that is true. If you know what you're doing, if you have composted before, if your pile is cooking, you can have that much carbon and nitrogen. Just put them together. And the final thing for adding materials is always, always, always finish with a layer of brown materials at the top. So see this, say you're using this compost bin like the one pictured here, and you take a little pail out and you dump it into your pile, and then you grab handfuls of leaves and you fill it up 1, 2, 3, awesome. Maybe you add some water and you turn it and you mix it all up. Once you go through that mixing process, green materials may come to the surface or may not. You want to add maybe a little extra brown material to cover. Don't ever want to see food scraps visible in your pile. Step 6, turn, baby, turn. Temperature matters. I'm speaking actually about the temperatures outside in terms of how frequently you should turn. You should always turn after adding new materials. It's going to inject oxygen into the system. The warmer it is outside, the easier it is for the pile to be warm. So we turn daily as the temperatures start to get into the 60s consistently. During the colder months, turning can sometimes be detrimental because that core is warming up. And then if we, stick our pitchfork in and go like this, dissipate all that heat. So it has to start from scratch. Below freezing, I wouldn't turn your pile. It's not really going to do anything. It's going to be probably somewhat challenging. If you don't want to add food scraps, during the winter months, you can always freeze them. Good rule of thumb, turn it after you're adding materials. And again, the mix of nutrients will affect how long material takes to break down. There have been times where I walk out and it has dropped 3 inches in a day or two. And then there's been weeks where it doesn't seem to be doing anything. So you really need to play with the moisture levels, the aeration frequency, and also just the mix of ingredients that you're putting in. Pile problems. Again, these are the reasons people don't start composting, right? These are the fears. So I'm just going to walk through some of them. Pile stinks. This is normally due to a high nitrogen content. Your pile could be going through an anaerobic digestion. Even sometimes you'll find, those brown crumbly things on the top, and then when you go in, it's wet and clumped together. So what you need to do is add more brown materials, break up that wetness, and turn it. I would not add water if you're having odor issues, and just continue to aerate and carbon your way through it. Nothing's happening. So normally this is due to a lack of water. Typically, especially in clothespin systems where people are like, I put everything in there, but nothing's happening, there's just not enough water present. So that's very, very important. So add water, again, aerate. There are bugs and creatures about. When is my pile in trouble, or where should I be worried? First off, there are lots of insects that are beneficial to your pile, and you should be excited to see in there, especially worms. They're amazing. Squirrels and chipmunks are fine. Most of the time, they're not going to set up home in your pile. As long as we're not attracting them as a food source, it's perfectly normal for them to scamper in and out at times. But you do want to make sure that they're not setting up camp in your pile. In the summer, flies can be a bigger issue, so make sure all fresh waste is covered with brown materials, such as like corn cobs, draw houseflies. So like, I love corn in the summer, but you have to bury it really well in the pile. If you're going to include it at all, this may be an item where a backyard composter might not put that in, because it is very hard to break down if you're not achieving temperatures. You still might need to chop it. And then I'm never getting anything out of this. This, again, I already covered this, but this does happen a lot when you're using a tumbler. So we'd recommend not adding more materials to the tumbler to allow the process to complete. Finally, also managing expectations. Managing your expectations, it's not going to be this crazy amount. You are probably not going to be able to spread compost in every garden bed that you have from starting a composting experiment today. But a little goes a long way with compost. Again, it's a vitamin. It's not like mulch that you're trying to cover everywhere. So don't be discouraged by that. When to apply it? So spring planting almost upon us. That's a great time to reinvigorate your soil. Mid-season side dressing, which is the photo you see here, this is done in the summer to help, again, add vitamins to the soil before the fall frost, so it can slowly work into the soil over the winter months. Compost tea is something that you can use with a small amount of compost, and then essentially it's turning it, steeping the compost in a liquid, and then applying it in that manner. It's great for lawn applications. And then a typical application for compost is anywhere from a ½ inch, which is really, if you're just trying to give the soil a little boost, to a 3-inch layer of compost, which that would be, you have degraded soils and you are trying to rebuild them. What plants benefit most? They all do. You can apply it to lawns, flowering plants, your house plants, food-bearing plants, and even your trees. And you can plant seedlings right into compost. And this is a kind of a visual of compost lasagna, and how you can start to build your compost pile. And now I am going to stop talking.